Good evening, everybody, and welcome to today's meeting of the Corporate Services, Climate Change and Scrutiny Management Committee on Monday, the 12th of May. I don't think we have any external guests, so I don't need to direct people to where the exit is and the toilets are. And there's no fire drill planned. If we begin with apologies, I've received apologies from Councillor Rowley, and Councillor Stewart is substituting from Councillor Widdowson, who's substituted by Councillor Wan, and apologies from Councillor Myers. Agenda item 2, declarations of interest. Would any members like to declare an interest in any item on the agenda? Councillor Coles.
Thank you, Chair. Just on item 6, motions to full council, I think pages 81 and 93 of that item refer to correspondence to the Police, Fire and Crime Commissioner, and I have that substantive role, albeit that I didn't have it at the point at which the motions were passed at full council, I think, but I just thought I ought to be clear for the purposes of the record.
Okay, thank you. Any other declarations of interest? No. Agenda item 3, minutes. We've got 2 sets of minutes. We have an amended version of the minutes of the 10th of March meeting, which we discussed at the April meeting, and we've now got an amended set. Is everybody content to approve those amended minutes? Councillor Rose?
Yeah, I just wanted to check the point I raised by email, which is just, do we need to specify every time somebody goes for a 1 or 2 minute toilet break in the middle of a meeting if they don't miss a vote, or is that excessive? Particularly if it says how long each person's break is and how many times they go in a meeting, perhaps there's more personal information released than intended.
I know we have historically made a note when someone leaves the meeting for good.
Yes.
I hadn't picked up what we're now minuting temporary.
It's not the only time it's happened, but it doesn't happen on every minute.
But if I'll leave that with Democratic Services.
Yeah, I guess if it's not mandatory, I would suggest we remove it unless someone misses a vote because of it, or they've left the meeting permanently. But I'll leave it to Dem Services.
Yes. We'll leave Dem Services. Yeah, consistency is a good thing, and I think if we can think about how best to reflect that will be fine. So that said, any other comments on the 10th of March minutes? If not, we have the draft minutes of the 14th of April meeting. Are there any comments on those minutes? There was an action for Sean Gibbons to share some information around questions that were asked around PV storage. I can't recall whether we've received that from Sean, but Jen, if you can send him a reminder, please. Okay, so we're happy to approve the 14th of April minutes. Yep. Thank you very much. We now move on to agenda item 4, public participation. We have one public speaker this evening, who is Councillor Carol Runciman, who's speaking in relation to agenda item 7, the schedule of petitions. Councillor Runciman, you will have 3 minutes to speak to us, so please do start in your own time.
Thank you, Chair. I'm pleased to be here tonight to speak to corporate services and everything else that you're considering about the petitions item. On that petitions item, you will see that there is a petition almost down at the bottom of the list from New Earswick, which I presented to Council in November 2024. I want to give you a little bit of background and then talk more about it. Firstly, the petition was not started by me, it was started by local residents who were very concerned that since the post office in New Earswick had moved from a parade of shops which has been there since the Roundtree Village was built into the folk hall, which had been recently refurbished, there's tremendous difficulty for people on the station roadside getting across to collect their pensions, find some stamps, buy a birthday card, have a cup of tea, go to a meeting, whatever it happened to be. And they came and talked to me, and I went to meet them several times about the issue of having time to cross the road. If you know that area at all, you will know that after the link road, there's a bend. And so anybody trying to cross there has got to negotiate traffic coming away from the roundabout quite quickly, and is quite dangerous. And a lot of the people who came to the meetings were people who used walkers or wheelchairs or walking sticks or buggies with young children, sometimes more than one child in a buggy, and they were finding they couldn't get across the road quickly enough. And they said to me about getting a petition together to ask for a crossing. Now, over 500 people signed that petition, which I took to council. And what can I say to them now? I'm meeting them every day. I met one of them a couple of days ago when I was down at the folk hall. Any progress on the petition? They said no. And if you look on your list, no, there isn't any progress. There's no action there. There's nothing that I can tell them. I can only say that to me it seems it's been ignored. And I don't think it should be ignored. I think when 500 people and plus get together and put a petition into council, if we really are a listening council, we should jolly well do something about it. Otherwise, I have to keep going back to them and saying, nothing's happening, nothing's happening. There's no action on that list at all. I think that my residents, like everybody's residents, should have faith in the council and think that the council is listening to them. And at the moment, my residents who have recently opposed a planning application, which some of you will remember, now have found that a petition which they took very seriously indeed has just sat there. So I'm asking you, when you get to the petitions item, if you consider very carefully taking that petition forward, because something needs to be done so I can go back to my residents and say, yes, it has been considered and some action will be taken. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Runciman. Obviously, when we get to that agenda item, that will no doubt be one of the petitions that we look at to see as a committee whether we're satisfied with the way in which the council is proposing to progress that. So thank you for coming to speak to us. We now move on to agenda item 5. So if I can invite officers to come and join us at the table. This is something which I'm always very keen to see on scrutiny agendas, which is some pre-decision scrutiny. On this occasion of the Council's draft Equity, Diversity and Inclusion Strategy, as well as officers at the table, the Executive Member, Councillor Lomas, is hoping to join us remotely. So she's able to listen to the discussion and have the ability to add any comments that she may wish to. So this is our opportunity as a committee to provide feedback and suggestions ahead of the final version of the draft going forward to executive in a few weeks' time. So with that, I will hand over to Laura Williams and Laura Svischowski. Yep, I'm practicing that. To introduce the paper. Thank you.
Thanks. I'll keep it very brief because Laura, who is our new head of EDI, does have to leave in about 30 minutes for childcare reasons. So then you're just stuck with me. So if we front load all the tricky questions for Laura into the first 30 minutes, and then I'll do what I can when she's gone. So we took a draft version of an EDI strategy in April last year to executive. That was the result of the work of a consultant who was brought in to assess us against the equalities framework for local government. They went out and did a lot of consultation with partner organisations across the city, various different groups across the city to see how we were performing. And that report was attached to the executive report that went last April, I think, from memory. So there was then some work done to produce the consultation. It went out for 8 weeks and closed on the 3rd of March. Laura started with us on the 5th of March, so she's had her work cut out, basically wading through the consultation results and making some changes to the strategy as a result of that. So she can talk you through those, talk you through the presentation, the results, some of the changes that she's made, and then we can, I guess, have an open discussion after that.
Thank you. Laura.
Thank you. I'll just read through some of the headlines from the consultation. The public told us, please be clear, please have really actionable and clear commitments, EDI, be clear on what your objectives are and why it's important. Make sure there's action, really accountable action around this. It needs to be driven by leadership, so we need to see a strong presence from leaders, and continuous engagement was something they wanted as well. They wanted to continually hear about how we're progressing across this strategy. So in terms of incorporating that into the strategy, I tried my best to make it as simple as possible by consolidating the objectives and the aims together. Also having clear deliverables and key deliverables within the strategy, and make sure that we have committed to engaging with the public in terms of how we will progress against the action plan going forward as well.
Thank you very much. Admirably succinct. So as we've got Laura for another 25 minutes, if I begin by asking members any technical questions that we can ask Laura ahead of getting into the debate on each section, which is how I propose to structure the discussion. Councillor Eyre.
Literally on a technical question, at the bottom of page 55, there's a list of the areas that we identify as protected characteristics, which is fantastic, but then it just ends with or other distinction. That basically means anything is a protected characteristic. I have concerns about that. There are certain people who identify with things that I don't support, but if we're just basically saying anybody who identifies as a particular group is a particular protected characteristic, what do we mean by other distinctions, and how do we make sure that doesn't apply to groups that are undesirable? For want of a better word, I'm trying not to name groups that.
Okay, I think, yeah. Understood, I think. Laura.
I'm just finding it. I think that was in spirit of the fact that the council is recognising some things that are not protected characteristics by law, such as those with care experience, and potentially is a typo that should not have been included. So I will review that. I don't know if you have any.
No, I think that's fair. We'll go back and have a look at that, because it
wouldn't-
is quite open-ended. So yeah, that's.
I wouldn't want to lose any of the gist of it. I think just maybe a little bit more consideration over, because I get the point that there may be things in there that we haven't thought of that we do want to identify as protected characteristics, but there'll be a lot of things that we might not necessarily want to. So just
Tighten the word.
not suggest deleting it altogether, but just go away and have a bit more of a think about how that I want that to be worded.
Thank you. Councillor Melly.
I'd appreciate a bit more background about how this came about and what purpose it's supposed to serve, because I think that EDI has to be a core purpose of every single department and every single service that's provided. It can never be a kind of secondary thing. I don't think there's any department who has a kind of purpose or mission, and EDI is kind of secondary that you've got to remember and add afterwards. It needs to be core to everything. So it's difficult to do an EDI strategy for the whole council, because there's just such a huge variety of services that we provide. And I think what that means is we've ended up with something a bit vague and non-specific, because you can't possibly go into the specifics because it'd be 1 million pages long. So I was just wondering, what is this supposed to achieve?
I think it's
Take your microphone.
Thank you. I think what it's trying to achieve is set out exactly that the EDI is core to everything we do, and we have a strong commitment first and foremost. I always joke that I'm trying to work myself out of a job, so that once we've achieved a state whereby inclusion is something that's in our DNA and is just secondhand nature to us, then you don't need me anymore. But in the time that it takes to get there, we need that laser-like focus in terms to make sure that we are considering all protected groups and all different groups and communities in the services that we provide and in our role as an employer. So I think what the strategy is trying to do is ensure that it becomes secondhand nature to us in a similar way to health and safety, for example, and we ensure that we've got that commitment. And part of the objective around having a very clear impact assessment process is to make sure that we are looking at new policies, new practices, new services, new changes to services, and making sure that we've considered the impact across those protected groups. So again, that laser-like focus on it until we are at a stage where we don't have to consider it because it's something that's second nature to us. I hope that answers your question.
Laura?
Also just to add as well, we do have a duty under the public sector equality duty to publish what we're doing in order to kind of further our work against equalities. So if you're going to do that, we'd rather make it meaningful and kind of try and do it in consultation rather than just stick something up on the website every year or two. So.
Thank you. Quick question for me around obviously we have the protected characteristics set out in the Equality Act and to which we've added in terms of care experience, and that there's been some process behind that in terms of a conscious decision. Other characteristics that sort of came out from reading the report in terms of social class, in terms of political opinion. I suppose my thought was what process have we been through to decide that yes, these are things we want to include and we want to consider alongside other protected characteristics, and whether that is similar to the approach other authorities have taken. So I just wondered how the process through which there'd been was that in response to consultation feedback, for example?
So you can jump in, but so on political opinion, that is actually covered under religion and belief in terms of the Equality Act. We talked about trade union membership, which is protected by some other piece of legislation, but we wanted to include it in the strategy here so that, again, it's clear that that is considered and protected. And then I've forgotten the other
Social
one.
class.
Thank you. So within the Equality Act is also a duty around socioeconomic background, and best practice from other local authorities is to consider that as a protected characteristic as well. So we looked at what other local authorities were doing and brought it in for that reason.
Yeah.
Do you have anything?
Thank you very much. So we're still on kind of technical overarching questions. Councillor Eyre.
So whether it's technical or overarching or not, but I'll
Go for it.
I'll leap in. So it was around the same sort of section, and something I've been involved with this for quite a long time, and one of the things I've reflected looking at it is that it's really interesting that the report's in 12-point font and the strategy's in 14-point font, which made me lead on to my talk about the fact that I was at the Equalities Advisory Group, which became the Social Inclusion Working Group. And one of the things they would bang on about, I was talking about endlessly, was about the fact that I think we agreed as a policy that all council papers should be 14-point font, not 12-point font, in terms of being inclusive. But we don't have those groups anymore. And I noticed that there is reference to a corporate equity, diversity and inclusion group. There's no mention of what that group is, who that group involves, what that's around. I think it's very important that that isn't just an internal group. I can't see anywhere in the strategy to replicate those good practices that we had previously of having cross-party membership and community group membership working together to discuss council policies and discuss them going forward to get that input into that. So I just wondered whether that that council corporate equity, diversity, inclusion group could morph into that, or whether there's any intention to actually have a group such as that.
I think that the intention is that the Human Rights and Equalities Board looks at that work. So that is open to, I believe, all
Yes.
local group.
I think that is quite wide ranging though. So just reflecting from my own experience, one of the best pieces of work we did was around changes to recycling, and actually had some fantastic feedback from people in the community saying, well, actually, for example, the blind community saying, well, you know what, putting our paper in bags is no good because the bags blow away and we can't get them back in terms of that. And that actually led to massive changes into how we implemented the recycling program. And I think something like the Human Rights Board shouldn't be focused on specific policy changes. It was really good having a reference group that you can actually just go to and say, bags to bins, for example, as we're coming forward to all those little changes of going, actually, here's a sounding board to put through changes to council policies through, and actually have a good conversation with people and actually get some really, really fantastic ideas that change things directly.
Take it away.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Councillor Rose.
Yeah, I mean, my problem is all of my things are either broad comments or technical details, so I'm saving most of it. I guess a quick comment to back that up, that we're very good now at doing the nothing about us without us piece of, if there's an issue relating to, let's say, disabled people in the city, we reach out to disabled people to engage them in that. But they should be part of every conversation and every decision. And I think we still have a lot of work to do to get public participation at broader issues and so on. So definitely would back more in this document about that. On the piece around which demographics are listed or not, I think there is a distinction between protected characteristics versus essential groups that we need to support, and there's a gap there. And the fact that our EIA in this example, the default text includes low-income groups, ex-offenders, veterans, etc., but we haven't mentioned them anywhere in the EDI strategy, I think is a big red flag for me. The question I've got, I guess, and a question on that would be, is there any particular reason why not? But the question I wanted to raise at this point in the technical detail was, we do in this document distinguish between equity and equality, but the way in which we then describe equality is at odds with the way we use it across the council and every other space. So HRED, we just mentioned, it's got equalities in the name, it's not equity. We've got equality in a bunch of other areas because we use equalities to mean the full scale word equality, which includes what it means in legislation. But when we're then defining equity, we kind of misdefine what equality is to explain why we're using equity. So I guess, is there anything we can do to kind of bolster what we mean by equality, and then why equity adds another layer on top of that, rather than saying equality is not very good, if that makes sense?
Okay. On your second point around equity and equality, I think we're encouraging a move towards using equity in our terminology. It will take time to sift through all of our different policies and documents and so on. It's not to say the use of the word equality is bad, and I hope that didn't come across in the strategy. It's just, again, to reflect that equity is where we want to get to in terms of recognising the potential adjustments or requirements for different groups, and how we can make those adjustments in order for them to fully participate and be at their best, and achieve and thrive, I guess is the best word I can think of. So yeah, there's nothing wrong with the word equality. It's just, again, equity better reflects where I think this strategy is trying to take us. And with time, I'm hoping that equity will be the term that we're using more commonly across the council.
Thank you. Do you want to come in, Laura?
Yeah, and just to reflect, I think that's a shift, that's happening across organisations and kind of across central government and things. But obviously we talk about public sector equality duty, and kind of the word equality is embedded in absolutely everything. So it is a iterative thing, and there will be times when you kind of have to use the two interchangeably. In terms of the groups, that's clearly causing some confusion. I think it seems clear from kind of the feedback. So we maybe just need to go away and think about the wording around those groups, and which ones are protected characteristics and which are groups that are being considered alongside, just to to sharpen that up probably.
Thank you. Do you want to have a supplementary?
Yeah, just a very time, I guess, on the equality equity piece, in terms of outcomes, absolutely. Equity is a much better way of looking at things. In terms of some of the areas that we cover as a council, obviously broad scope across all residents and services, equality is the right word to use in some places. And I think it's just about explaining where one matters, rather than trying to deprecate equalities over time from HREB and stuff, where equality of rights and things like that might play in my personal opinion. And on the different groups, there are a couple of bits in these paragraphs where it says it really matters that every single member of staff does this to support these groups. And then it says, and we also note this other list of groups, and it should just be one list. If we are treating them as the same as each other, I think there are some places where it reads like we've got 2 layers of protected characteristics. So just
Thank you. Councillor Burton.
Thanks. Following on from Councillor Melly's question about how kind of broad this area is, it's semi-technical, but to ask Ali, we're here. What, in terms of the head of role and the kind of resources available to you to deliver this, what does that team look like? And in terms of delivering on some of these things across such a big area, is there certain areas that you are looking to target, kind of prioritize in terms of targeting, and how do you kind of think about how you'll approach different departments to make sure that they are mainly just asking about delivery, really, I guess, is my question about how we make sure this gets delivered effectively to teams, because it's a big task.
Yeah, good question. So within my team, I have an access officer and an integration manager, and obviously that's a small team for such a big remit, which is why the champions are a key element of the deliverables that I've listed. So heads of service will ideally nominate someone within their service area to be a champion, and those champions will be trained on the human rights and equity tool, impact analysis tool. It's quite a long title. And through that tool, teams will be able to work through the different impacts of their delivery. So looking at new policies, practices, changes in service, etc., and ensuring that they've considered the different impacts going forward. I think something that's important to understand is that these champions will be trained across human rights and EDI. However, they know their services better than I do, and whilst I can provide my expertise, I think it's important that champions feel able to look at the data that they have available to them, look at the feedback that they've received in terms of their services, and apply that EDI lens to it, and look at it in terms of what are the impact across the protected characteristics and how can we mitigate the risks that we've identified. So with time, I think it's about ensuring that there's greater competency across all of our staff at identifying EDI related risks and mitigating those risks.
Thank you. Councillor Merritt.
Ben's just asked some of the questions I was going to ask, but I separately wanted to ask a little bit more about the consultation. I mean, with some reports, we actually get a fairly full listing of the comments that have been made. Could I get a sense of whether there was generally good support for the strategy? Was it mainly dot and comma comments we were getting, or were the broad comments on it as well?
So there were broad comments. I'm trying to recall how much we captured in the slides. I think there was some percentage of support, I think, in terms of there was majority of people said we do want a strategy and we do want a commitment to EDI from the council. That's first of all. And then in terms of the open text responses, there was some responses around, is this a good use of taxpayers' money? But there was likewise a lot of positive comments around good experiences of using services, and people happy to see that the council is making this commitment and wanting to do work in this area. And then I've tried to include in the slides a summary of where people have made very specific recommendations, and where we've heard from particular groups. So there was mention around ensuring that we include communities such as the Gypsy and Traveller community, and making sure that we're considering their needs under the race protected characteristic, for example, is one area that we looked at in a bit more detail. I hope that answers your question.
If I could then ask another question in terms of the consultation. 1 in 5 have experienced or witnessed intolerance or discrimination from CYC, and 1 in 4 disagree that council services are accessible to all its communities. I mean, they are quite large percentages. Have you got, from the more detailed responses, do you think sufficient information to understand what those negative experiences are, in order to have a good handle on what we need to do to try and avoid those problems continuing?
That's difficult to answer. So maybe not as much detail as I would like. That was a closed question, and so people responded. We had around 500 responses, but then those that responded to the open text was much lower. It was under 100 people. So I didn't hear from everyone that responded yes to that question. However, we did get some indication of where there were challenges, and again, I've tried to summarise those in the slide. So disabled people, for example, talked about some of their experiences as being negative. Trans people talked about some of their experiences, and so on. So I tried to capture as much as I could where the different challenges were. But I think we do need to work with groups like the York Access Forum, the Disability Rights Forum, and other groups across Gypsy and Traveller communities as well, to understand some of the more specific barriers and issues that they're facing. So, and I definitely plan to do that. It's not something that should be limited to just this consultation.
Thank you. Laura?
It was just to echo that really that you finished up with, was just that one of the things that was quite strong in the consultation was actually that people were really keen to engage with us and to do more engagement with us, and for us to talk to some of those groups more than we currently do. So I think that having Laura here in that extra capacity, having the EDI champions in place, and knowing that people kind of want more of that dialogue means that this can be iterative as well, and we can get to the bottom of some of those concerns. It's been pretty successful so far with the Access Forum that has sort of been implemented since the Access Office started about 18 months ago. And so having those opportunities for people to be constantly engaging with us, I think, is really important. This can't be a consultation every 4 years and then done. We need to get to the bottom of some of those comments and some of those experiences is really important.
Thank you. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the papers. Got a question. It's on a sort of specific, but it is also broad brush, and it's regarding communication. So this is something that touches on every single council service, and a sort of constant anxiety I've got about the council's inclusivity towards particularly older residents is how it communicates to those who aren't online. Has that come up much in any of this work? Might it be addressed following, I'm guessing, the eventual approval of the strategy? Just keen to hear a bit more, really.
Yeah, so it did come out in the consultation. It is something that we're very conscious of. So, for example, we'd like there to be an annual report on our progress, but we'd like that to be part of the public meeting that the Human Rights and Equalities Board holds each year. And when we conducted the focus groups and the public meeting, we were reaching out to those different groups and we were going to the spaces that they occupy as much as possible. So older people were one of the groups that took part in a focus group. So again, I think it's about working with the different bodies that we have, such as the Interfaith Forum and the York Access Forum and other bodies of that nature, to ensure that we're reaching out and consulting as much as possible. But what the continuous engagement mechanism looks like, I don't know yet. And that's something that I want to, again, get feedback from those different groups to understand more.
Thank you for that. I mean, it'd be interesting to know what the council's own comms department would sort of put forward on this front as well, because, and this is really too specific and it's not to sort of get into now, but we have a real problem with a complete lack of regular hard copy information going out about important changes. So I totally acknowledge that we've gone out and we've met with older people's groups and we've gone to their spaces, but there's also thousands of older people who don't go to those spaces, who don't use computers, and they're in a sort of information vacuum a lot of the time, which is probably damaging for the council as well in the long run, because, you know, they'll often fear the worst about changes because they haven't been able to understand what's going on. It's not to, you know, yeah, we're not going to bottom it out here and now, but as you know, it's something that I'm quite concerned about.
Yeah, and I think you know, we've been wanting to talk about sort of customer experience, which is part of our remit as a scrutiny committee, and hopefully that will be coming in the autumn. And this very much feeds into that in terms of how are we sort of shaping the way we communicate and interact with customers. That means that we do embody the promises and the priorities set out here. Laura, I know you have to go. Just in time for Councillor Stewart to ask his question.
Yeah, on the slide on CYC workforce, it says 59% ranked a workforce that reflects York's diversity as important or very important. So in other words, there's a very sizable amount of people that don't regard it as important. It then goes on to say a proportion of respondents felt that recruitment and promotion should be on the basis of merit alone. My first question is, what was that proportion? And my second question is, what will be our policy? In other words, will we be doing recruitment and promotion on the basis of merit alone, or will we be doing it on some other policy? And if so, what is that?
I'd have to go away and find the number, to be honest, in terms of what the number is. In terms of recruitment and promotion, it is done on merit. Obviously, everything goes out to recruitment, and we do recruit on merit. I think there's a difference between whether you recruit and promote on the basis of merit, or whether you go out and say that, you know, we would like to, you know, attract as wide a range of people that we possibly can do to apply for every single role. We think about where we advertise those roles. We think about sharing them far and wide. Obviously, we're an Armed Forces Covenant Gold employer, and there are lots of roles that we'll kind of go out and try and promote within the Armed Forces community for veterans, people that are leaving the services, etc. Because we may not, as an employer, be on their radar. But our jobs are fundamentally, they go out to advert, we sift them. It's all done on merit. You know, we never recruit on the basis of somebody's protected characteristics.
Thank you. Councillor Eyre, was that a general question? Go for it.
I mean, on that point, I always found it very interesting. And what your definition of merit is, I think recruitment should always be who's best for the job. And that might take in a wide range of factors, including who was best to interview, who had the best CV and everything. But your HR process should be about finding the best candidate for the job who can deliver that for the next 5-6 years. And that might involve lots of different things that you factor into that. But my actual question was around what we always call difficult to hear voices, seldom heard voices. We've gone round and round forever talking about that. This doesn't tell us how many people were part of that consultation. I might have missed it in the papers. My concern is, in the same way, we have wonderful councillors sat around this table, but we're not 100% representative of everybody of the population. And there's a certain breed of people who decide that they want to be councillors. There's a certain breed of people who think they want to be part of focus groups and answer CYC questionnaires and get involved, sort of following on from Councillor Taylor's point. What work are we doing to make sure that those people in those groups that are already seldom heard, I think is, and there's loads of different terms we can do, but within those seldom heard groups, there are probably 80–90% of that cohort that are even less heard than the more vocal 5 to 10%. What are we doing to try and get into those communities? It's not easy, and I'm not expecting you to have any answers. I do it day to day doing that, but it's what are we making sure that we're doing that and not just listening to the 5 or 6 people who say these are the issues in my community that aren't that representative of everybody.
Yeah, I agree. It's really, really difficult. And, you know, we also have to think about the things that like when you do a public consultation and you do a public consultation in a hotel in the city centre from 2 o'clock till 4 o'clock on a working day, you're going to attract the same people who have got the capacity to get into the city centre and give up, you know, a couple of hours of their time to go to a consultation. That isn't going to work if you're doing 3 jobs, if you don't have the English to take part in that consultation, etc., etc. So I think what Laura reflected was trying to do more of going out to meet people where they are and in places where they are naturally gathering anyway, and working through various different groups who we know have a more trusted relationship potentially than the council does with some of those groups. But, you know, I think what Councillor Taylor reflects is right, that there are lots of people who probably are in an information vacuum for lots of different reasons in the city, and that there is more that we can be doing to tackle that and to challenge that and think about how we reach those groups. But it's not easy. It's not easy. I think people are easier to ignore groups for a reason, and it's because it's really tricky, it's challenging, it takes time, it takes energy, and nobody's kind of come up with a perfect solution yet. But yeah, it's about trying to explore all ways of doing that, basically.
Thank you. Did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I think it's just even drilling that down even further, because there were people who are part of multiple communities, for example, who might be even more marginalised. So fortunately, for example, homophobia is present across the whole. It may be higher in certain communities, and certain groups may be less comfortable identifying from a certain demographic group. So if you are homophobic, if you are homosexual and you are disabled and part of a certain community, you may be even less likely to come forward and do that. And I think there's a real danger that we only hear from certain individual strands, and so equal going to those groups. If you're feeling isolated, you won't attend community groups in your community necessarily because you feel isolated for other reasons. So I think again, no one's ever found the solution, but as long as we're aware of the problem and we're continuing to look at it and find any which ways we can to try and make sure that we acknowledge it and are trying to do something about it, but also acknowledge that those views that are presented are just the views of a particular subsection of each different group.
Thank you. I'd like to now move into comments on the specifics of the draft strategy itself. The first 2 sections are, I think, largely background. So I was proposing to start at section 3, unless anyone has any other comments I'd like to make first. Councillor Rose.
Well, I've actually got a few comments on the exec report, a few on Annex A, and I've got 3 points, 4 points on section 1.
We'll sort of gather up those comments and then we'll move into section 3.
Do you want me to chunk all of the non-section 3 stuff together?
Yes,
all right. On the exec report, I think it misses lots of key context. So it doesn't describe the care experience piece, for example, when it talks about some of the background to this and other ambitions the council's had. Mentioned already about some of the acronyms and wording that aren't quite right. I think there's a few more that don't quite get the wording right. It doesn't identify comms issues, as Callum mentioned, around physical comms, but also about the fact that these demographics need proactive comms, not just you have to look it up on a website to find it, multiple languages, etc. I think the 3 main points of this report, only 35% believe the council provides opportunities for community groups to influence decision making, and that's not even coming into the intersectionality piece that Nigel just raised, which would be a much lower percentage of people engaged. Only a third think there's an opportunity to engage. So it is a critical thing we should be tackling. I don't think this paper or strategy tackles it. Paragraph 19 says we only had focus groups with 5 demographics, which means we missed out loads of key demographics. We just mentioned our veteran obligations. There wasn't a focus group with them, for example, lots of others as well. The entire annual action plan is less than 1 page. And that's just in the exec report. We haven't got a separate annex for that, but my notes for just section 3 and 4 of the strategy are longer than the action plan. It doesn't talk about what the tool is that's referenced throughout the strategy. I don't know if that's something that's already in place and if we're just expanding usage of it. But I don't know what the cost is of it from this. I don't know what it can do that other tools can't. If it is a separate tool or if it's just Power BI, that should really be in the exec report as well. Annex A, the consultation summary. I've had lots of positive words about Laura in role and sorry, Shrishovsky in her absence. But there's lots of positives, and I think it's an important role. I think there's an important work being done here. But on this specific data summary, if at any point as a line manager I'd ever received this, I'd have had stern words about the quality of data presented, the absence of any information on the demographics who came forward on such an important topic, and all the pages, it just fails to kind of talk about anything on them. Even the kind of the consultation itself, where you rank the 5, doesn't share whether you think all 5 are important or all 5 are unimportant. The whole of that Annex A piece for me is a major concern. And then in terms of the strategy section 1, I think the Our Vision piece is very, very fluffy and generic. It talks about hate crime in the context of being business benefits. It talks about securing the inclusion of all, which I don't really think means much. I think it should be merged with section 3, which is also way too light for what it's trying to achieve. But together they almost represent a kind of summary. We mentioned already definitions around equity, equality, the list of diversity options, but the phrase inclusion is about workplace experiences is just not true. Inclusion's across the whole of society. It's not just about workplaces. Page 49, the table shows we're really bad at representing the city in our workforce. There's therefore loads we can do to improve the extent to which our workers represent the city at large. But none of that's really in this strategy. There's a few bits, but it doesn't show the scale of the challenge that is outlined in that table. I also think saying too small is a problem. It should say less than 1% or less than 0.5% or whatever it's trying to say. And I'll finish on this one for now, which is what the public says is just 3 people. I don't think I've ever seen any report from the council, and I include, like, for example, Health Watch reports that would only list 3 people and say it's what the public says. I mean, one of them says there aren't any African restaurants. I mean, I can name a few. So trying to summarize what the public says in general, we know we've had loads and loads of text comments in this. I just think that the strategy and the consultation and the report about it are really, really light and thin and airy. And I appreciate the level at which all council staff are strapped for time. I understand the challenges, but and we'll get into section 4, which is the real detail of the strategy, but all of those summary bits to me don't really say enough and give me some real concerns around what the council's intending to do, to what extent it cares about EDI, if that makes sense.
Thank you. I won't ask you to respond to all of those points, Laura. Yeah, and that's the purpose of this. This is why this item's come to us. I think there's particularly the piece around the sort of granularity of the consultation feedback. There may well be more granular data underpinning the slide pack, and the slide pack is, I think, necessarily high level.
I don't think it summarizes it either, though. I don't think it's granular or captures what it's saying.
That's fine. But yeah, I think in terms of if there is more granular data, then if that could be made available as well, it just again gives you more to kind of dig into. So I think they're all valid points. Thank you. I had Councillor Merritt next.
Yes, there's this recommendation that each service area has one objective. Can I be clear, is that just one objective each year, or is that one objective for ongoing?
No, so at least one objective in each service plan, which is updated annually. So
Which is
we'd be
updated
hoping they'd be
annually.
completed within that year, and we'd then be chasing them up at the end of the year to see if it's been completed and what's going to be for the following year.
Potentially that looks as if it'll take many years to in effect roll out all the objectives. Is that really going to be effective?
Do you want me to? So I think it's more than just the one objective. I think in response to one of the questions that Councillor Rose asked, which is a very good point, the Human Rights and Equalities Analysis tool is to build upon and replace using equality impact assessments, because although it was felt when we were assessed against the EFLG that was quite a good EIA, there's a section in it currently on human rights that people struggle with as a whole. I read a lot of EIAs on my evenings, and the human rights section is a bit that people really struggle with. I think public sector equality duty has been there a long time. Equalities training for council staff has been there a long time. People understand that and how to kind of grapple with that to some extent. The human rights piece is harder. So we've developed that tool with the Centre for Applied Human Rights, and it will give people a lot more scaffolding in terms of the things that they might need to think about. And that's something that Laura will be rolling out now that she's in post. So that will be implemented. Obviously, we'll have the EDI champions, and there will be a package of training on various different things rolling out as well. We're hoping some of those things will start to make changes, as well as just, we don't want people just paying lip service by having one thing in their service plans to tick box, but it's a starting point to get things into people's service plans, to get them thinking, because as Councillor Melly rightly says, it should be part of everything that everybody's thinking about all of the time, rather than just an add-on or a tick box. But I guess we start somewhere with people.
Okay, so we're on things other than section 3 onwards still. Councillor Burton.
I'm hoping that this is before section 3.
Okay.
But there we go.
We'll get everything from everywhere.
Just so this is the executive report. Just one bit under organisational. It might just be the way that these reports are set out, but under the organisational impact and implications, it lists a number of teams or departments who've been asked to comment on this. People like environment and climate and other groups that perhaps don't have quite as much in relationship with the public as departments like housing or social work. And I was just wondering why those departments have been selected to be the ones that comment on the paper rather than departments like social work or housing, who have a massive interaction and probably the ones that often are the ones that get fed back up in terms of risks in this area.
Slight my shoulders, but that's probably more of a question for Lindsay than it is for me, in terms of that's what we're given as a report template. That's not to say that we don't go out and have those conversations with other teams. And obviously there's a lot of overlap between what I do in housing, which sits in the same directorate, and there are clearly a lot of implications for areas like housing and adult social care. But on the report implications, that's the template that we've got.
Yes, thanks. I wonder whether it's just, because normally it's set out in that way, or maybe it's just a heading on it. It might just be worth checking because it says options analysis. Organisational impact and implications, but I thought it was in a different place normally on the exec report. So it might just be worth checking the format of that. Something to take away. No, thanks. But I thought that might be the situation. So that's handy. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, I don't think it signals a lack of interest or involvement. Councillor Coles.
Thanks, Chair, and apologies. I'm also struggling to work out which bit section 3 is. So sorry.
Page 52 onwards, and the big.
In which case, my question is about something that is on page 53.
Oh wow!
Would you like me to hold it?
You can kick off the discussion.
Okay, fine. It was about the discrimination in the distribution of grants and other resources to reflect the diverse needs within the city, and it was just a reflection really that that feels like certainly a real challenge in terms of how you ensure that the money that the council is allocating doesn't necessarily go to those who've got the most time to put into applying for it, potentially versus where it might be needed most in the city. So it was just really anything that had been thought about in terms of how that might then be manifest itself in reality. And then probably a related point, which I haven't seen in the report, but similarly, which feels important in a similar vein, is in terms of how people access services in a more equitable way, and that you don't necessarily get services being allocated just where people are kind of equipped to shout the loudest, but actually based on where their need might be greatest. And I think that is probably a real challenge for a lot of council services, to make sure that actually the people who maybe aren't shouting at all, but actually maybe in dire need of help and support, and not being forgotten or lost in service delivery. And I think that's really hard for stretched public services to be able to reflect that well for a city. But just anything that was sitting behind your thinking, and including both that the point around distribution of grants, but also the wider point about access to services.
I think just I picked up the line about distribution of grants and sort of thinking, well, I could think of a number of things it could mean, all of which probably not what's intended. And you start thinking about how would groups that currently bid for funding, if they had, what challenges they may face. Some of them are legitimate challenges in terms of how do they demonstrate the project they're running or the scheme they're in charge of is as inclusive as it needs to be and should be. So there may be a kind of a knock-on need for training or information for groups who are providing services, not deliberately excluding or discriminating, but maybe inadvertently. So I'd just be helpful to understand your sort of thinking behind that.
Yeah, so I think it's twofold. So one of them definitely is around, we've had organisations approach us to say, that they would like to be more inclusive, and they would like their grant making to be more inclusive. They would like the schemes that they're running to be more accessible to a wider range of people, and particularly since with things like ward funding, where we've brought in the requirement to kind of hit those each principles. People have approached us sort of saying, how do we kind of make things more inclusive, tick those boxes, demonstrate that. But there have also been things where we've had challenge in terms of the fact that if we've had a panel that's been made up of members, for example, we've then had a little bit of challenge around, well, where's the diversity in terms of race, etc. Now, obviously, as a local authority, there isn't anything that we as council officers can do about that. We have sort of said, maybe you need to go away and engage with your local political parties in terms of how they are recruiting candidates and how they make themselves more representative. But that is really challenging. But I think there's a lot of work happening in the city with various different organisations around more participatory grant making, which helps to remove a lot of those kind of obstacles of having the time, the capacity, the ability to fill in long-winded applications, to go through really kind of tricky, arduous processes. I know that York Together have recently done an event at the Bluebird Bakery in Acomb, where they were giving out very small grants and had tried to make that as participatory and as easy to access as possible. Similarly with the money that's being distributed by the York Community Fund. So I think there's, people going away and looking at how they can make a process still robust, but more accessible than a 14-page grant application form. It is probably what we're thinking there.
Yeah.
And then I've talked so much, I've forgotten the second question, sorry.
It was about access to services and how you avoid people who maybe articulate or shout the loudest being the ones that get to the front of the queue quicker than the people who maybe don't either prioritise themselves or actually just articulate their own needs as well.
So again, I think there's a lot more to be said in terms of the engagement and the way that we go out and kind of find those people. Obviously, I'm going to say it again, and I bore everybody in every scrutiny meeting by saying it, but obviously we are looking at bringing in this neighbourhood model, which is working hopefully much more closely with people and aligning with the health and with the police and with the voluntary sector in terms of how people access services closer to home, and that we're able to use the kind of local area coordination, social prescribing, the voluntary sector and things to meet people where they are more. And although often with those services, sometimes the people who shout the loudest are the ones that we need to, we do need to target. But yeah, I guess doing things on a more local level and trying to engage more.
Okay. So we'll continue gathering comments on section 3, the promise, and section 4, what we will do. I've got Councillor Rose next.
Thanks. Brief on a couple of points that have been made already. There's the discrimination distribution of grants piece we were just talking about. It also doesn't mention how we can improve the giving of grants towards work that closes equalities gaps. So it's a slightly different angle. It's kind of similar to what was said. And I guess just an aside on the political parties piece, the council definitely can improve political awareness in general, how to engage the council processes, public participation, standards of candidate potentially, what political parties are. I think every political party would welcome more members from all demographics. So, it doesn't cause any of us any grief to have more awareness in general across the city. And a quick question about the tool. Is the tooling decision already made, or is that part of the paper that's going to executives for them to approve that the tool is a core part of the strategy? Is that a decision that's already been made?
Yeah, so the decision to use the tool has already been made as kind of an operational decision, because it's essentially just an improvement on the equalities.
Yeah, but any budget,
impact.
everything that's already been dealt with
Yeah,
previously. This is just mentioning it in the context. Okay.
By us, effectively, yeah.
I guess two things, I've stripped it back to two things, Stephen, you'll be pleased to know.
Okay.
One is, it says we have a unique process for human rights analysis. I would suggest we want to aim for world leading, but uniqueness isn't necessarily an asset. We should be learning from best practice, from globally best practice and other organisations. And then I guess the main thing from section 3 and section 4 for me is, one of the bullet points says fit for purpose and up to date. I think that's the bare minimum. I skipped over in section 2, it mentions the legal obligations and the limits of those obligations for marriage, civil partnership, pregnancy, maternity. We shouldn't just be aspiring to meet legal obligations. Those areas, they should be hierarchized into what we said before about the kind of 2 sections of listed groups or distinctions. Training says it's to help people meet their duties. That sounds very minimum bar for that as well, as opposed to here's all the things we aspire to do above and beyond, and not just here's how we ensure we meet the legal obligations, but here's how we ensure we go above and beyond in these areas. And in the annual plan, it mentions who the training's for, but it doesn't in the strategy. So, for example, councillors receiving more diversity training is something that is in the action plan, but it isn't in the strategy. And I think explaining a bit more about what that training means and how it helps people be the best they can be in their job in these areas, I think is pretty key possible.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think in terms of the tool, actually unique probably is the wrong word, but world leading potentially eventually could be right. We're really, really fortunate to have the Centre for Applied Human Rights in York. They've been instrumental in helping us develop that tool. They're very, very excited about its use and what that could do, and kind of rolling that out as best practice.
Put those words in the strategy.
Yeah. In terms of the language sounding like it's bare minimum, with the best will in the world, I would love for us to be, gold standard at everything that we do in terms of EDI, to, roll out exceptional training, to make sure everybody is really, really well equipped. With that comes the need for budget and resource, and we are doing this, on a shoestring. We've been very fortunate to have the budget growth to bring in Laura, and we've been really fortunate to get somebody who is incredibly experienced and brings like a wealth of experience from the private sector and stuff with her. But she is one person. We have one access officer, one person working on kind of integration and cultural partnerships, and a very stretched HR team. So if we've been a bit I don't know what the word is, unambitious, it's not because we want to be unambitious, but we don't want to put in targets that just aren't realistic and have us somewhere in a year's time when we come back here and you say you haven't done all these amazing shiny things you promised, because we're trying to deliver it within, a tight budget and a difficult financial position.
Okay. Yeah.
I totally agree. And I think there is merit in having what the legal requirements are and where we exceed that. I don't think there's any problem in the strategy of having, here is what we have to do statutorily, and then here's the stuff that we expect / aim to go above and beyond. And picking the one I mentioned about marriage, civil partnership, pregnancy and maternity, it's an area of the Equality Act where it goes, well, you don't have to do it with those characteristics. I think we would expect to as a council, and the same for a number of other things. That's an expectation that doesn't cost us anything extra. There might be other things that do. The action plan has to be tangible, has to be realistic, but the strategy, I think it can say, here's where we would love to get to. And at the moment that might not be viable, but hopefully one day it will be. Thanks.
Okay. Any further comments on sections 3 or 4? The promise and the what we will do. Councillor Waller.
Thank you, Chair. Really, I'm trying to find the focus on the individual, and many of the problems that we face as councillors is where members of the public have found that the council hasn't worked together to provide them with the information that they need, and that person may be disabled, may fall into one of the protected characters, may not. But the continuous reminder of council teams to think about, well, if I lived there, what would I like to know in order that I could get around my daily life with the appropriate level of knowledge of things that are coming along. And I've had a very interesting day finding out the traffic arrangements for Front Street and Askham Lane, which the bus companies have been told, no, nothing was happening. Northern gas networks have an entirely different view. So I think it encapsulates the looking at it from the perspective of the individual. And I think that has become a harder job as teams in the council have got smaller. It's been more difficult to retain that. But I think that's a key part of living up to all of these things that we're talking about, because that will ensure that members of the public get the right information. And there's some thought about, well, there are other protected characters that we need to consider as well, but at least it gets people thinking about, how do I want the council to be presenting itself to members of the public?
I think it's I'd pick that up in section 5, where it talks about members of staff are required to support the strategy. Ensure members of the public are not discriminated against, because that's the kind of nub of it. And then it's you've talked a bit about training and support and objectives in departmental sort of documents. Is there anything more you think we could or should do through this strategy, which I appreciate will not resolve all of the various kind of sort of public facing responsibilities the council has? Is there anything more you think we could do in this strategy to drive that focus among staff?
The kind of focus on the individual and making sure that, you know, we're seeing it from that perspective, is it? So it's a shame Laura's gone, because this is something that she's really, really interested in, actually. And she's just been at a public health team meeting and is going back to a public health team meeting soon to sit in a room with them and take them through almost the journey of somebody who did give some feedback to this consultation, and she then had a follow-up conversation with to talk through kind of their experiences and to see things essentially from that perspective. And it's something that she's very keen to do with various council teams, to kind of talk them through, I guess, almost an end-to-end journey for somebody, and what that might mean with, you know, various different issues that people have encountered with the council, things that have been fed back. So I'm sure she could go into it in a lot more detail, but it is all of the things Councillor Wallace says would resonate very much with Laura, because it's something that she's very keen to go around to various different team meetings and do with people, because I think it's it's always stories that bring things to life, I think, for people and resonate with people. It's very easy to present people with data and talk about a strategy and mandate that people have to buy into this. But what's going to resonate with people is actually talking to them about people's experiences where things haven't gone well, or actually they've had a really positive journey, to say, okay, that's what we need to be doing more of. And that's the kind of work that needs to be fueling the work that we're doing around customer experience, as much as I hate the word
Yeah.
customer. But
No, it's good to hear you having those, you're breaking it down to the individual service journey level, because it's through doing that you'll identify the sort of improvement areas. That's good to hear. So if we move on to section 5, responsibilities. We picked up the thing about making it sort of real for staff in terms of impact on the individual. Section 6 from monitoring and evaluation of the strategy and plan. Councillor Merritt, then Councillor Rose.
Yep, thank you. I think it's very clear that training's absolutely fundamental to delivering this strategy, and obviously note what you said in terms of the resource constraints and so on. But in terms of monitoring, I wonder whether there should be some explicit references. You could argue they're perhaps implicit in 1 or 2 points, but some explicit reference to how we're doing in terms of spreading training and on some specific assessment of how effective it's been, because I think those two are absolutely fundamental to delivering, and it perhaps worth making them explicit.
yeah, that's helpful. I mean, HR, we can look at making them more explicit. HR obviously are monitoring people's kind of training and their training journey in the council. And for Laura, she's really keen that training isn't a annual tick box. I've completed that training and it's done, and then it's kind of put on the shelf for a year. She wants to see that that's constantly being embedded, and that's a huge part of the role of those champions, is to make sure that that's kind of a continuous journey, and doing kind of lunch and learn sessions and various different drop-ins for people, so that it isn't just I have to do my equalities training once a year online and I've ticked that box and then I'll just forget about it again.
Thank you. Councillor Rose.
This one's a small one. Section 6 is monitoring and evaluating the strategy and plan. It then has some text and says more details are in the appendix, and the appendix is then measuring the impact. I don't know why that appendix is an appendix. It's just part of the substantive text. So I think flattening that would work. Only a small point to add is I think it'd be good to explicitly add reference to the page 49 table of how badly the council represents the city and its workforce, and that should be a core part of what we're measuring in addition to any other KPIs.
Okay. Are there any other comments, observations, suggestions members would like to feedback prior to the strategy going to executive? Councillor Rose.
Yeah, one tiny thing. I fully back the point that Andrew made around individuality and individuals, and the point that Nigel made around hiring practices. I think we need to be really clear when we're communicating with the public on this, and I think it should be clear in the papers as well. What we're trying to do is make sure that we're catering to every individual's need. We're trying to hire the right person for the job, the best person. And the challenges in both of those things are that there are systemic barriers in each of these areas. And I think that a lot of the challenges that are faced in the media talking about EDI are people sometimes intentionally, sometimes unintentionally misunderstanding what EDI is, and they think that it's about hiring the wrong person for other reasons rather than about dismantling those barriers one by one. So anything we could do for that would be good.
Councillor Taylor.
Thanks, Chair. Just a question on timings, really, because you've had all kinds raised tonight in this committee, and this is meant to go to executive on the 3rd of June. I know there's an alternative recommendation that executive can consider comments put forward by scrutiny committee members. Just wondering if there's going to be enough time for that executive meeting to consider the different points that have been raised tonight in whatever papers they get. Because that's pretty tight. There's a bank holiday weekend as well. I guess what I'm getting at is I'm trying to sort of politely make sure that this conversation hasn't been a waste of time.
Yes.
And I'm not suggesting you would
I
make
was-
it a waste of time either, but time's tight.
Is
Yeah.
that a point you might want to bring in the executive member?
Well, I was going to do that. I think you're right in terms of, there've been some comments that are, suggesting tweaks to text that are relatively straightforward. Other comments that might require, or sort of point to sort of more fundamental redraft of some aspects of it. Obviously, the executive member will want to consider what they've heard, and if it's felt that more time is needed to come up with the revised version, that's a matter for them. But I will give Councillor Lomas the opportunity to comment shortly. I mean, what we're asked to do is either the recommendations, I'd say it's fine as it is to go to executive without any changes, or scrutiny would like the comments we have put forward to be taken into consideration, and I think we're erring on the latter of those two. I think that the points that have been raised are worthy of consideration. But if I know Councillor Lomas is travelling, if you can hear us, Councillor Lomas, would you like to? Is there anything you would like to add at this stage?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for bringing me in. Really interesting to hear all of the discussions. And I think we definitely want to take into consideration everything that everyone has contributed. We've definitely always had that ambition. And although I recognise the timescale is tight, both Lauras have assured me that they have capacity within the tight timescale to do amendment to the paper and make the whole process meaningful. So that's definitely what we want to do.
Thank you very much. Councillor Rose.
Yeah, Katie, if that might have changed as a result of the volume of things said this evening, my opinion would be that it's better to get it right and defer if necessary, and to leave up to the Lauras whether there is enough time than try and push against that commitment. Do you think that's a fair statement?
I mean, that's a conversation I'll have to have with Laura and Laura.
Yeah, that's that's absolutely fine. Is there anything? Sorry, Councillor Eyre.
Just a thought, because obviously getting it right is the right thing, but coming back to executive on multiple occasions isn't ideal. So whether there's an option to say that the executive member, in consultation with chair and vice chair, can make any necessary amendments, then the exec can approve it and move on. But just a thought, expedience.
I don't think it's in our gift to say yay or nay to any amendments that are, well, it would be entirely, reasonable for officers to share an updated draft with members of this committee, having heard our feedback. I don't think that just needs to be just the chair and vice chair. I don't see why an updated draft can't be shared with us all. But again, I'm happy to leave that to officers to consider in discussion with the executive member. I don't think we need a resolution to that effect. Okay. Is there anything you'd like to add, Laura?
No, I think we've covered about everything.
Yes. Maybe more than you bargained for, but well, thank you very much, and you and to Laura S for your time and for engaging with us in what I think has been a really helpful and constructive discussion.
Thank you.
So thank you very much. I suggest we have a 5-minute comfort break now, and then we'll reconvene just before 5 to 7. Shall we make a start? So we're now on to agenda item 6, the schedule of council motions. So at the last occasion where we discussed the report, there was an action for the vice chair and I to go through the list to suggest some petitions that could be marked as completed, for a variety of reasons, including length of time since the motion was passed and a lack of clarity as to whether the actions that were part of the resolution had been undertaken. So we've been through that and made some suggestions. So what you're seeing is everything in terms of we've kept on the things that we're suggesting marking as completed, obviously kept on the ongoing issues. So the purpose of this discussion is really to identify if you spot anything that's been marked as completed that you think actually shouldn't be marked as completed, please do say, and to pick up any motions where there are just gaps, there's a lack of information, to give us assurance as a committee that the actions are either underway or being considered. Our role in this committee is to seek assurance that those motions haven't been forgotten or ignored. We may not agree with the outcome or the action, but it's really a case of having assurance that the action of one sort or another has been taken. So, who would like to start? Councillor Rose.
Thank you.
Yeah.
3 on motions. One, in terms of lacking detail, page 93, the return to community policing, right to the North Yorkshire Police Fire and Crime Commissioner, calling for a reversal of the current freeze in PCSO recruitment. The latest action says unclear whether a letter was sent, but we've closed the action. I think we can replace that action with, we've got a new PFCC, they are a York councillor, they've recently announced PCSO numbers are going up from 95 to 122, and PC numbers are going up from 80 to 112. So rather than, we don't know if we sent a letter, we know for a fact that the issue we were trying to address has been resolved by the new PFCC. I think would be a better closure action. On page 115, in terms of close that hasn't been, it talks about the council resolves for officers and exec members to engage proactively for the next 3 months. There's still work going on, but they did do that, and there is a status where we can say they did engage, here's the current status, and I think we can close that off. And then there are a couple of things on page 123 and page 126 that were from 2024, but they were write a letter to, in both cases, to the Chancellor of the Exchequer. I don't know why writing letters seems to take more than 2-3 months max. I appreciate we can't ask for that to be closed if they haven't sent the letters, but I think we agreed at a previous meeting that that's why it now says the political assistant to the group is listed as an action person as well. But if that hasn't been actioned, how do we get it actioned faster? And if it has been actioned, how do we get the update on here? And it ties to what Carol was raising from public participation as well. If things are from 2024 and it's write a letter, we really should have an update.
So I know that, and Dem Services colleagues will correct me, that I think political assistants are now aware that if there is a resolution that requires a letter to be sent, that that action is being chased. If things still aren't happening, in terms of where it could be escalated to, potentially group leaders. I'm trying to think of where else you would take that, because it's not within the gifts of Dem Services to make people write a letter. There having been a resolution to do so, so that would be my take on how that would be best escalated. I think in relation to, I mean, there are lots of motions that have been overtaken by events. I'm not suggesting we go through each motion and say, well, that didn't happen, but something else has happened. I'm not really sure that is a precedent we would want to set.
I guess to clarify, it says unclear whether a letter was sent. Usually, I'd at this point be suggesting we do send a letter if we're unsure if it was sent, but I don't think there is a need for us to send a letter because the new PFCC has actioned what we were going to write to them to ask them to do, if that makes sense. It is slightly different to just an unrelated action.
Okay. Councillor Ryan?
Yeah, I just think it's a learning point because sometimes timing is important. So on page 119, for example, one of the reasons we were all bringing party those fair funding notions was the spending review in December 2024. So there was value in sending that letter in July 2024, pending the spending review 7 months later. I appreciate now that spending review has happened and it's become pointless, but we need to reflect as a council and go, well, if we're looking to lobby government 3 months in advance of announcement of spending review and we didn't even bother to do that, that's not very helpful. And we can't then sit there and go, you know what, we didn't get a very good deal from that spending review. Well, we didn't act on that.
Yeah, and that's something that collectively we need to take responsibility for. Councillor Stewart.
Yeah, there's a lot of words here, aren't there?
Yes.
A massive amount of words. There's a lot of time spent on this. Looking through it, I can't see anything we've achieved, and I do mean anything. Now, Councillor Coles can nod and say that she can increase PCSO numbers because of this motion, or no, not at all. Okay, even a shake of the head. And it just is absolutely ridiculous, in my opinion, that we pass these stupid motions, and that's not to denigrate the topics, which, you know, do matter and are important topics. We pontificate over them for so long. We then write these letters, or even more stupidly, we don't even write the letters. And there was a Councillor Baxter motion a few months ago where I asked, has the crucial letter gone? And, you know, Bryn said, no, it hasn't. And so they scurried around a few days before the next full council to write the letter. And it just is absolutely ridiculous, the time that's being spent on this. And I'd like to see, although it won't happen because it would show the sheer idiocy of this, an estimated cost in officer time of having to write all of these reports about the action we're taking or not taking and the results we're not having. And I'd also like to see the tangible achievements that have come because of these motions. And I would think we'll probably have a quite high column of officer time, if we're honest, and a quite empty column. And I just think the whole thing is absolutely ridiculous that we sit here and look at all these things and pat ourselves on the back on these minor details, and we throw in a bit of, well, perhaps the letter hasn't gone. I mean, Councillor Rose says he doesn't understand how it can take more than 2 or 3 months to write a letter. 2 or 3 days. 2 or 3 days it should be taking, not 2 or 3 months. So those are my constructive comments, Chair.
And I think those comments, when any of us are sitting down drafting a motion to full council, those are issues we may wish to reflect on as individuals and as groups. Our job here this evening is not to critique the motions that have been approved, but to monitor actions in response. So I hear what you say, but
there have been no actions. You know, we can see that in the thing. You know, officers have, in some cases, pointed out that
we're not having a blood by blood discussion of, well, was that action the right action? We're not here to discuss that. You know, there are plenty of cells populated in the action taken column. We're not going to have a discussion as to whether they what outcomes they have delivered. It's a product of whatever the motion was that was passed. It's an essential.
I mean, I was just going to point out that you've used every single motion option you've had available to you, and you could have skipped a few if you wanted. But I agree, there are loads of actions here we're not raising because they are good actions. They did actually achieve something. They are marked as completed. We're only raising the ones where there's a problem. But I think there's a valid point in what you're saying, Chris, which is the motion that asks someone to write a letter that may or may not be sent doesn't necessarily have the most value we've ever got in it. And maybe that's something for us to reflect on as political party about what we put in the resolves. And if it's for the council to do something that we can vote on as the council, then great. But as you pointed out, Stephen, if we've got ask a group leader to write, actually the action here is we ask them. If they've written it or not, we aren't in control of that. All we can say is it was requested. So yeah, maybe less of the beg somebody else to do something and more of the actually do something ourselves is in order.
Yeah, I think that concerns me the most are where there's just the kind of the gaps, where there's a lack of clarity. I'd rather have, I was looking at one from September 2023, the action taken is a gap. I'd far rather have this is not being pursued. Fine, we can close it off. You know, I might be unhappy about that because it was my motion. But I'm perfectly happy to to close it if I know that actually it's not going to happen. There are reasons why it's not going to happen. That's fine. Similarly, the gaps under the motion around trauma-informed city, community assets, primary and social care providers, fair trade city. Some of those were really quite detailed motions, and clearly the moves had put a lot of work into those. And you know, I don't know from a Dem Services perspective what more we can do to engage with officers, even if the response we get back is not necessarily the response that we would hope for, but at least it allows us to know where we stand rather than go through the same list with the same sort of resolutions that are marked ongoing or incomplete. I think, you know, way back it was when we first got back on this with a view to bring it up to date. It was going to go to corporate management team. There's going to be real sort of senior ownership of it. You know, I know this probably doesn't feature at the top of corporate priorities, but and I'd welcome advice from Dem Services colleagues as to what more you think we could do.
Yeah. Thanks, Chair. Yeah, it does go to CMT and it does get discussed, but you're absolutely right. It is quite labour intensive for our team, and we're quite stretched. But I'd like to take the opportunity to welcome Guy Close, introduce you. He's just started today. It's his first day, Dem Services Manager. So I'm hopeful, as you know, you may know the tracking of motions only fairly recently came over to Dem Services. So we need to get a robust process in place that works. And we're looking at, we've got report management functions within bond.gov that we're looking at utilising. And I'm hopeful that we can get something a little bit more robust in terms of the actual mechanics of the tracking. But what we need to do is make sure that the engagement with officers, you know, works. I know we have Corporate Governance Board where governance matters are discussed, and perhaps we can add that to the agenda for those regular meetings to just make sure that that dialogue is working a little bit better and reduces the impact of the resource impact on Dem Services.
Okay, and yeah, and I think as members, I know I'm happy to do what I can. If there are actions that are kind of within our gift to deliver, then yeah, I'm sure we'd all happily do what we can to make sure we can put them to bed one way or another. Councillor Merritt.
Can I just echo that? I have buttoned and hold my own leader on a couple of occasions. But we have spent an awful lot of time on these, and the chair much more than myself took a lot of time going through these. So I hope we can put the ones that are completed behind us now and focus on the more relevant, up-to-date ones where we still need to get the answers.
Yeah, it should be a 5-minute, you know, we're on it, rather than 3 years worth of hey-ho. Councillor Healy.
Thank you, Chair. Just as a point of clarity, it's our responsibility to track the motions and the actions. Who's responsible to ensure that the actions are actually undertaken? Is it the leader? Is it the COO? Is it an individual?
I would see it as the head of the relevant service area. You know,
Okay.
If the response was this has happened and it hadn't happened, I would want. If it were my motion, I'd go to find out who the relevant head of service was and ask them.
Okay.
Shall we move on to petitions? Agenda item 7. So I think it's 6 months, I think, since we've had the petition schedule. So this has been tidied up since we last saw it, and we've got the version that just shows the open schedule of petitions. So I would invite comments from members. I've got a few comments, but I'll open it up first of all. Councillor Waller.
Thank you, Chair. And in the theme of tangible outcomes, I was slightly disappointed that petition 206, repair of the pothole on Front Street, had somehow missed the list because it has been filled in. So I was delighted that that outcome, which 65 residents had petitioned for, has been delivered, and therefore you can see it. In terms of petition 225, in the number 16 bus, that was as a result of a service that has become unreliable, and residents along the route felt very strongly about that. It did ultimately end up at an executive member decision session in December with an option to vary the timetable to help make it more reliable. That never happened. And therefore it might be something that Nicholas looks at in terms of what then happens next, because I think these are very much coming from the community, and they not unreasonably expect something to happen as a consequence. So as a longer term outcome, there is a different operator, and thus far seems to have resulted in that more reliable service that people had wanted. And the petition may have gone somewhere to persuade officers to look at alternative providers, but we don't know that. And I think there needs to be that feedback to residents in terms of the outcome of the petitions. Thank you.
So I'm suggesting that 225 can be closed because, yeah, it's overtaken by events in a way. Okay. Who else did I have? Councillor Stewart, then Councillor Eyre, then Councillor Rose.
Thanks, Chair. It's not about the particular petitions here, but I just thought it might make sense going forward. I don't know if we can set this to have some threshold of numbers before which petitions go on the monitoring of these reports. I mean, there's 3 very specific street petitions which are each signed by 12 people, and it can't be an efficient use of time for those to be petitioned, put on the radar, divided up. You know, it's literally lobbying. At what point do we have just sort of, don't email your councillor, don't email the council, just do a petition of one person, and then you have this committee tracking it through. So I thought some sensible number might make sense rather than 12 people.
Where do you draw the line? I think this is probably a constitutional matter, isn't it?
I was going to say, Chair, yeah, it's a constitutional amendment would be required to the petition scheme to bring in some kind of criteria or number, limit, set limit. But yeah, it would need to go to constitution work.
Set at 10.
It is set at 10, so it is quite a low, very low threshold. Absolutely.
Was it on the same point? Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Councillor Eyre. Sorry, Councillor Stewart.
Sorry, thanks. But could this, I mean, if there is a view around the committee, could the committee not feed in that as the committee manages these and looks at these, the committee thinks 10 is too few a limit? It might be a lone voice.
I don't think this is a best place to have that discussion. There may be an issue that affects a relatively small community so an interesting discussion, but not one to have here, I would argue. Is that on a related point?
No, I just echo that. We have the potential petition from residents of a street in my ward which has 6 houses. So it will be difficult to even get 10. But they may. So I think you basically just have to, weight it according to the circumstances.
Okay. Councillor Eyre.
Yeah, just an observation, Chair, about how we we monitor the action taken and whether it's appropriate. Page 147, petition 230, Save Foss Bank, which was a bit more than 12, that was 1,500. And I know that it says that we're not the landlord. That sort of downplays the council's involvement and influence in that particular site. We have, without wanting to say too much in public, there are other levers that could be used in terms of things like that. So I don't feel like that response really gives us the sense that the council has or hasn't done everything that it potentially could do. And I just wonder, I'm not sure how we capture whether that, we may have done, but I can't see from looking at that whether we've
either
done.
Councillor Merritt or Councillor Melly like to.
Just that, I mean, I had the same thought, but when it comes to any planning applications and like that, we'll submit the petition again when there's various stages when the council does have influence.
I think it's just hypothetically, not getting into it, if there's a larger development site of which the council has an interest in part of, then it does have the potential to influence that whole site, even if the particular site itself is not in their land ownership.
So the issue is around the kind of accuracy of the information that's been provided in response to the petition. Okay.
Nigel took the words out of my mouth on this one. I was waiting my turn for that one. You've highlighted the council's property interests. I mean, the other one is the planning. Forward planning, the involvement with developers who are coming forward with adjacent sites is another avenue of influence. And whilst this is probably strictly accurate in terms of the narrow interpretation of the petition, the need that underlied that petition has not been addressed, and planning and property might have a role. So I'd hope we can have it circulated to the other areas for their attention and to see what they can do in due course.
Yeah. Okay. Councillor Rose.
Thanks. I mean, on that point, we do only have a very short summary on this. I hope that the letter to residents is more empathetic and longer and says that we at least tried and all that stuff. So, we can never have all the detail in our action updates. A quick flurry of petition things. Petition 198 on page 141. The heap scheme ended. So my understanding is that officers think that action should be closed. It ties in again to what Carol said about November 2024. This was November 2023. And all that can be said, all updates since then is I'm continuing to talk about this, but in the end, it wasn't achieved. How do we do better than that in the future? I think is an important point for another day. Petition 204 on page 142, it says feasibility study to be conducted. I believe the feasibility study was conducted. There's still an update paper to be drafted, but I think that petition should be closed as well, as what was asked for has been done. Petition 213 on page 144 says for the local plan in June 2024 as the action, which I believe was resolved in September 2024. So I think that can be action closed off as well. And then there are a couple that say early 2025 on dates. I've been told that they're this side of summer, so I don't think we need to update them, but I guess it's a question for all outstanding petitions. When that date slips, how do we make sure it stays up to date? And I think the answer is this new tool that's going to come in to manage petition actions, etc., will help with that. So
just picking up the page 141. I mean, if on the heap, I mean, if and I know we're circulated, which so early saying, there'll be a successor scheme, then that could be added to kind of close the loop.
I mean, for every year forever, if we don't achieve it each year, or we tried it for 1 year, failed, and then at what point do you draw the line on it? Is the question.
Petitions, they don't keep being updated as the kind of issue evolves, but this one's been open for so long. If we can have a resolution wording that allows us to close it off, if it's a case that the heap scheme doesn't exist, then that is one way of closing that off.
Yeah, well, that I asked what the latest update was, and the response I got back was the heap scheme had ended. So that's why I'm raising that it should be closed, because that's what the response I received was. But I guess the point remains that if you have a petition that's not been resolved in 20 months and might be reliant on a future scheme that doesn't currently exist, are we going to keep all unresolved petitions on the list forever? Is there a point where that line is drawn? Ideally, it would be resolved, but we had an opportunity to resolve with the existing heap and failed. So
It relies on us receiving an update from officers, setting out what the actual position is. If officers say nothing, then we don't have the basis on which to mark it as completed, and I want to mark as many as completed as
but
possible.
I believe you were copied in on the reply to me that said it should be closed. So,
and I don't disagree. It's really a case of, well, so what do we say by way of either action proposed or action taken to allow us to close it off? Was that a supplementary?
Yeah, Chair, thank you very much. The issue has not gone away, and similarly, Foxwood Lane resurfacing petition. I'm sure that all 196 people who signed that petition feel that the issue has not been satisfactorily resolved. Therefore, I would resist those being closed until the matter is resolved.
Okay.
Chair,
we're not going to have a
no, I know, but if we
debate
did have
about
one for every street that
individual-
needs resurfacing, are we going to have 200 petitions in
It's entirely
perpetuity?
within
Where
members,
do we?
it's entirely within the gift of members or members of the public as to what they wish to petition the council. I think that's all I will say on that. Is this a supplementary question?
Yeah, and
Councillor
I
Burton?
just wanted to say, I guess, and we don't have the information to close it at the moment, I would agree, because we need something from officers that basically says then. I mean, it does say about the heap on that earlier, if we updated that, say that the heap is closed. Or in like this instance, it is perfectly fine for officers to say, if they have justifiable reasons why they're not going to take forward a petition, it just needs to be included in the schedule. They just need to publicly say, we're not going to spend money there. That's their decision. They should just put that on the template.
I'd far rather have
fine.
clarity, because we're not here to say, well, we disagree or we agree or disagree with the action. We just need to know what it is. And maybe that's something that, in terms of communication with officers, so they feel empowered to do that. Councillor Healy.
Thank you very much, Chair. So it's actually a supplementary to the point that Councillor Stewart made about the numbers. Page 149, petition 234, it has 2 signatures. So on the current definitions, it shouldn't have even made it to this table.
Yeah, that would seem to be in breach of the of our constitution. All right, so I think it had been.
Yeah, but it shouldn't have been on here to start off with then.
Yeah, anyway. Okay. Yeah, well spotted. Councillor Taylor.
Thanks, Chair. I'm sure this will be addressed given the representation made by Councillor Runciman in public participation, but just like to sort of formally note that as a committee member that needs a meaningful response from either the officer and or the executive member. I mean, that issue has been around for way longer than the petition was submitted as well. It's really important that it's not left hanging.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, Service Officer did try to get something for this evening to bring, but we haven't had any response yet, but we did try our best.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for that. Councillor Burton, you had a substantive? No? Oh, right. Just a few I picked up, I think similar to the ones that Councillor Rose did. 217 about the further report will be considered early in 2025. I think this is the cycling facilities on Wentworth Road. I suppose the question is, do you say, well, we'll close it because there's a plan, rather than keep it open for the whole sort of journey of that issue? Yeah. That's how I would see it. Otherwise, we'll never close anything until there's some kind of resolution. We're not dismissing them. We're just saying, well, that's where the action has got to. It may lead to a permanent cycle storage hangar, it might not, but that's, you know, the petition was around welcome the opportunity to trial the storage hangar. That's kind of where it's heading. But are there any other specific petitions that people want to comment on? No. Okay. So we'll update and circulate an updated version, hopefully with input from officers that will allow us to reflect the current state of play with all of the petitions. Agenda item 8, task and finish group, draft terms of reference. So this flows from a council motion. So this is an action flowing from a council motion that we have progressed. So it relates to the motion agreed by council on preparing for proposed changes to long-term sickness and disability benefits. So there was the motion that was passed resolved to request the relevant scrutiny committee undertake a review via a task and finish group when detailed government proposals are known, in order to identify likely impacts on the demand for support from the council and its local partners. So I had a go at drafting some terms of reference for a task and finish group, shared it with Councillor Stewart and Councillor Merritt for review and comment. So what we have here is our kind of starter for 10 in terms of how I would propose we go about enacting the resolution that was put forward by council. So this is now open for comment. I'm not precious about it, so please do feedback. Councillor Coles.
Thanks, Chair. I think it looks very sensible in terms of a proposal. I'm very happy to volunteer if that is helpful to be part of a task and finish group. The only thing I would add that I couldn't see in the proposal was just that it's probably useful at some point during the work of the task and finish group to engage with some external partners around whether or not our assessment is accurate and the need probably to work in partnership with others to make any recommendations. But I'm happy to help if that's useful.
Thank you. Yeah, we will need to make sure that we do bring out that this isn't a case of councillors and council officers sitting in isolation without looking at, you know, so we don't reinvent the wheel, but we also take into consideration work that others are doing that may give us some of the answers that we're after. Thank you for that. Councillor Eyre.
Thank you, Chair. Just expanding that even wider, because it's not just within the council, without the council. I'm not entirely convinced that within the council we're all entirely on the same page, because I did have a conversation with officers the other day who weren't aware of this potential scrutiny task and finish group who are doing some similar work. So I think we need to make sure that we're working together across the council. I know there is a policy and practice paper that's already been produced and circulated, which does give some of the figures, which is about 6,000 households and about 13.65 million a year in terms of figures. So that work has already started. So I think getting into that and working with our own council officers across adult social care and across revenues and benefits to make sure that we're dovetailing it. And then I think the only second bit that I would add on to that is a bit about the numbers. I'm slightly concerned about the numbers. My view is that people will not be, of those 6,000 people, it won't impact all 6,000 at once. And I've had those conversations with officers. I'm not sure how much data we can get from DWP, etc. But if, for example, we're working on a 2-year cycle that people are being assessed every 2 years, then my suspicion is those who've just been assessed will probably be okay for the next 2 years until they come up to reassessment, and then they will be hit. Whereas those who were assessed 19, 20 months ago will be about to hit this a lot sooner. So if there's any information we can get, whether we can or not, I don't know, But stratifying those 6,000 into, of the 6,000, that's going to impact 1,200 in October, 1,200 the following October, 1,200 the October after that would be useful. But I always overestimate the quality of data that we can get. We collect so much data, but we never actually seem to have, as a country, as a world, we collect so much data, but never seem to be able to extract the bits that are of most use to us. But just considering that as well as not just that 6,000 people will be impacted, how many this year, how many next year, how many the year after?
Yeah, because it talks about engaging with officers and external partners to better understand current provision awareness levels and insights into likely future demand, say, including timescales or sequencing or however, however best to capture that. But it's the kind of thing that will be hopefully apparent when the group starts its work. Any other comments or suggestions? Councillor Rose.
I think the terms of reference are fine. I think that the are good even. I think that the topic is important. I think it's important that we do this work. My only concern is A, task and finish group and what it does and how it works in general is currently up in the air. And B, the scrutiny committees themselves are currently up in the air. So in a week and a half, when we have our new scrutiny chairs and committees slightly more locked in, and then how we make sure all task and finish groups operate in the same way, that might change this. I'll obviously raise the concern about this coming to this meeting rather than next meeting for that reason, but I don't think there's any problem with us voting through this with the proviso that it then adapts to whatever the new way of working is. We have a lot of task and finish groups at the moment that are allegedly still in existence but never seem to have finished, so just need to make sure that whatever the way of working is, we align them all.
No, that's fair. And this is sort of based on how things currently work, but that's it. Yeah, it can be adapted to fit new ways of working that are being sort of developed through another task and finish group or working group. We call it a working group, don't we? A working group to embed new ways of working for scrutiny and task and finish. Councillor Stewart.
Thanks, Chair. But would this be impacted by the changes anyway? Because I'm just thinking, the remits from a council motion, whatever committees sit in the council, it's not going to change. The membership, obviously you said it'll be sort of 2-2-1. It's not drawn from a particular committee. So hopefully we can just crack on rather than it be anything that gets caught in a juggling of different names and everything.
I mean, I would envisage this task and finish group could report to the new people scrutiny committee. It could report to this committee. I think it would probably make sense for it to report to people. But that's, in terms of where the task and finish group would report to. But as you say, the members of the task and finish group don't have to be from a particular committee. They can be from anywhere.
Yeah, I'm happy with that. I'm also happy with it to come to the futures corporate. I think it makes sense in both worlds. But my point was more that the summary of external assessment of our scrutiny said that task and finish groups are generally rubbish and don't work properly, and we need to do them in a completely different way going forward. And so with all the respect to the paper, it looks good on paper. And sometimes we have got really good outcomes from task and finish groups. Maybe there's a new way of working that isn't reflected on the paper. That's all I'm saying. So as and when the new chairs meet and agree what we should be doing, bringing that in alignment with it makes sense to me.
Then we're in a state of continuous improvement when it comes to scrutiny and task and finish and all the rest of it. And as with all the ones I've been involved in it, you get out of it what you put in it. Sometimes you're thrown off course for reasons beyond your control, but I would hope we can make progress with this and stick to the brief and crack on. So with that, a member's content I'll go away and reflect on some of the suggestions to amend the wording, but with those changes made, a member's content to accept these draft terms of reference. Thank you very much. So in terms of membership, I think I suggested 2 Labour, 2 Lib Dem, 1 Conservative. Already got some nominations, which is good. So when we've got a full slate, we'll crack on. But if there are other expressions of interest, you don't need to say so now, but if you can let me and Jane know in due course, that would be good. Thank you. Agenda item 9, work plan. So we obviously we have annual council in May where things will change, the scrutiny landscape will change. This committee will potentially still exist, and maybe with a different name, maybe with a shortened name. Just a bit of spoiler alert. And there have been discussions amongst current chairs and vice chairs as to sort of transition arrangements. Because obviously we have the new committees will be in effect from after annual council. So place is relatively unaffected. Obviously people scrutiny will be an amalgamation in the main between two current scrutiny committees. And there've been discussions as to looking at what was penciled in for June and July for those committees, whether meetings in June and July would be appropriate and necessary in order for that new committee to cover the items it wished to cover, recognising we're in a new world where scrutiny has a refined and more focused purpose. And that's something that this committee needs to consider as well. If we're moving to a situation where this committee doesn't meet monthly, it meets every other month, and in between times we can cover items in briefing sessions that will be open to all members. We have to look critically at, do we need a public meeting to receive a report on something we're not being asked for our views on, but it's to inform us and maybe lead us in other directions that would prompt us to have a public scrutiny report. So looking at what we've got for June and July, and so my pitch is that we do go ahead and have public meetings in June and July. Just so that's my opening gambit for this committee. In terms of the items for June, we've got a major projects update, which is one of the sort of key aspects of this committee's work. It may be in that report we're asked for views on things ahead of a report going to executive. I'm not clear about that yet, but I'm due to be meeting with Gary Taylor to find out a bit more about what he wants to bring. The second one I think is I personally feel is quite important in terms of outline budget process. Obviously, we had more input in terms of a meeting where we had to look at the materials that were being shared for the second phase of consultation on the 25-26 budget, and I thought that was really helpful discussion. So what I envisage that item being about is how can this committee play a part in the development of the 26-27, is that right? Yeah, 26-27 council budget. So that's really an opportunity for us to have those discussions with Debbie Mitchell and hopefully the executive member, so we know what we may be being asked to do in the autumn. So that's why I think it'd be really useful to have those discussions in this forum. And then the July item, Howard Wing Green Energy Park business case, I anticipate that being a pre-decision scrutiny item, which is why I would envisage that being a public discussion rather than a briefing session. The finance and performance outturn will just be a subset of whatever executive can. We don't really need to look much further beyond that. We'll need to look at any future agenda items through the prism of the new approach to scrutiny. But I would welcome comments. Councillor Rose, please, then Councillor Coles.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to comment because we don't have the terms of reference and what's included in the new scrutinies, my expectation was that place would change. It would absorb housing, for example, as was my assumption, as opposed to that being within people, because you do need to still load balance the work between those. And I would assume that major projects is still within us, but that place topics wouldn't. And to the best of my knowledge, York Outer Ring Road is a place. The Castle Gateway area is a place, Station Gateway, Harewood Wynnard Green Energy Park, York Central are all places. So I don't know, and climate change I would assume would be absorbed by place committee rather than staying within corporate. So without having seen any of this, because none of this has been public for whatever reason, I don't know what our committee is going to cover in the future, and it makes it quite hard to say whether it's just the financial strategy that's part of our remit or everything.
Yeah, those are all entirely valid points.
If I can help, we will be appending the revised terms of reference for the scrutiny committees to the annual meeting report, and we will append the revised scrutiny meeting schedule as well to that report. So you'll see that with the annual council papers.
I look forward to seeing it, but it doesn't help me in the moment here. So other than deferring to the chair and vice chair to come up with the June and July agendas, there's not much I can suggest.
No, so the working groups of council resolved to implement these scrutiny arrangements and empowered a working group made up of current chairs and vice chairs to have those discussions around remits of the committee. So the points you're raising are ones that have been actively discussed, and I think on the kind of is it place, is it corporate, major projects sit here, not so that we talk about the detail of the road layout on York Central, that quite rightly would go to place. It's in terms of the more kind of strategic delivery angle and the links with the 10-year strategies. But yeah, we sometimes I have to keep reminding myself, no, we're not here to talk about the minutiae of the scheme. It's more about the sort of strategic element. But yeah, it's difficult to to have a view with still some uncertainties. Councillor Coles.
Thanks, Chair. Just a small point that just may be worth reflecting on before you nail this down. But the medium-term financial strategy is being proposed for the 9th of June, but the comprehensive spending review is on the 11th of June. So it may just be worth considering shifting that forward, unless those dates aren't set in stone. It just may be worth us having a medium-term financial discussion when we've got a slightly bigger sense of what the macroeconomic picture is going to look like for local authorities. But just a thought.
Yeah, I think it's unfortunate that obviously that we won't be able to discuss something that's not known, so that it may just be discussion on budget process without the medium-term financial strategy bit. Councillor Merritt.
Yeah. I am conscious that we are rather perpetuating the existing arrangements rather than moving towards the new. And a key focus of the new, if we're going to have a lot fewer actual formal scrutiny committees, is both the use of briefings to convey what are essentially information type items, to briefing sessions, and to use task and finish more where we know where there's a set of issues that we need to delve in. So I do wonder, and particularly when with Joe's comment pointing out the unfortunate timing, whether the medium-term financial strategy and also the F&P outturn the following months might be actually items that would be better for briefings. Clearly, if things come out of them that ought to have more public be exercised in public, then that's something that could come back. But I do really think we should try and tighten up rather than perpetuate the current arrangements into what is meant to be a different world from the new council year.
Yeah, and we have to kind of ask ourselves a question: could this be something that could be covered in a briefing? And yes, certainly if sometime after the 11th of June, kind of an all-member briefing on what the strategy looks like and what the implications are. I'm guessing it'll take some time to work through what the implications might be at a authority by authority level. That's exactly the kind of thing that could be a member briefing rather than have to come to a meeting where we could note the paper but would have very little input into what happened. But no, that's a fair challenge. Councillor Eyre?
I think reflecting both on Councillor Rhodes' point about uncertainty and Councillor Merritt's point about same old, there was a lot in that scrutiny view about pre-decision scrutiny and how we shift towards that. We're presented with, for various different reasons, 12 months of no signs of pre-decision scrutiny. And for example, the movement of Castle Gateway from September to 3 weeks' time, I'm going to assume that's an update report rather than pre-decision scrutiny, because there's no way we can all brief ourselves on those 3 topics in 3 weeks to provide any level of pre-decision scrutiny. So it leaves a lot of uncertainty about how and where that pre-decision scrutiny is going to be. I hope it's Councillor Rose's point that it's about uncertainty, and as the committees solidify, we'll start to see those things drop into those individual work plans, because there's those 2 topics, especially there, really need a lot of pre-decision input, and time is drifting. We're at May already. If it's June, July, August before it even goes on a forward plan, then we're looking at the end of the year before we even get around to some sort of discussion about how that could be implemented going forward.
It's something that has been discussed in the working group in terms of it comes back to the relationship between sort of chairs and vice chairs, officers, to be able to do work planning better than we have done in terms of not just looking sort of 3 months ahead, but 6 months, 12 months ahead. And yes, there'll be uncertainties as to when an item will be at a point where it's going to be brought forward for decision. But it's given that the meetings will be less frequent, it's even more important that we, even if we pencil in, potential pre-decision scrutiny as far in advance as we can, just so we've got a sense of where we're going to potentially adding value, in the same way we had a sort of detailed discussion on a pre-decision item tonight. Councillor Rose?
Yeah, I guess I agree with all of that. Just to add, we haven't halved the number of meetings to double the number of things we're covering in each meeting. The purpose is that the task and finish groups will cover a lot of the pre-decision scrutiny. So my assumption would be that maybe we'd have a major projects working group that does a lot of the major project ongoing tracking and only brings it to a scrutiny when the timing works and when it's big enough, or something like that. So, but this is, again, we don't know until we've got that detail out there.
And that's exactly the point we've discussed in the working group. We need a single version of the truth, so everybody knows what the briefing sessions are for, what task and finish groups are for, what escalates an issue from one to another. Because we'll all have good ideas, but probably quite different ideas, and we need to be really clear about the framework within which we're working. Otherwise, there's not just a risk of committees will go off in wildly different directions, which will be very frustrating and confusing. So we're acutely aware of the need to be to clarify that, so we all start off on the right foot. Councillor Merritt?
Just on Nigel's point about the new process and getting pre-scrutiny, that was one of the things that we discussed in some detail at the last scrutiny review meeting just last week, and the importance of the CFGS recommendation to have a more detailed and longer forward plan is absolutely essential, because with the sort of cycle that's emerging from the discussions, where in effect you have a 2-month cycle in which all 3 scrutinies meet, then if you don't have a minimum of 6 months forward work plan, then you actually don't have a chance of ensuring that you can get a pre-scrutiny meeting in the right timescale. So that is going to be one of the core requirements in process that we require if we're going to get pre-scrutiny at the right time. And, you know, across all the potential topics where we feel there's a case for it.
Yep. Thank you. Any other comments, colleagues? So I think this will obviously evolve. Hopefully, when the papers for annual council publish, we'll have a clearer idea of the remit of the committees, and be assured that the working group is working to make sure we're all equipped to play a full and active role in the refreshed scrutiny arrangements. Councillor Stewart, are you wanting to express your enthusiasm for the refreshed scrutiny arrangements?
Well, I wouldn't go that far, but just on sort of Councillor Merritt's point about the timelines needed if we're going to have pre-decision scrutiny, there is obviously another side we could potentially go down, which would be that the pre-decision scrutiny would be part of the non-public meetings, just to throw it out and play devil's advocate, which obviously is sort of briefing style. If we were to do that, then obviously it would take it away from the need to be so formal with agendas and everything like that. I mean, things could come when they're a lot more relevant, and it could theoretically, potentially, in some, you know, far-flung galaxy, lead to more positive decision-making if it is private. Crazy idea.
Again, we're wandering off into constitutional matters here in terms of when pre-decision scrutiny is pre-decision scrutiny. I have no problem at all with informal briefings for members, maybe at the kind of the inception stage of a piece of work or a project, in terms of looking to gather kind of early comments to inform a, you know, policy development work that then can come back to a formal public scrutiny committee for debate on the sort of near final draft. Because, you know, scrutiny is meant to be, it's not just for us, it's meant to, you know, enable residents, members of the public to engage and for them to have input. We don't have as much as that as we would like to. So we do need to think we're not just an insular group, or we shouldn't be. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree with that specific point, but what we're doing and what we have been doing and what I'm sure we'll be doing the years henceforward doesn't engage people. You know, it simply doesn't, and it switches people off. You know, residents out there never ever talk about scrutiny. They never ever talk about there's going to be changes to the park and ride. I hope that gets some good scrutiny and how I can engage with that. You know, the whole thing's another world in terms of how these things align with forward plans and everything like that. What residents are concerned about is what's going to actually make their lives better. And if we're going to have a decision on park and ride, for example, it's how we get in there. And if you have the informality, you can still have, you know, we'll reach out and who should be involved in this and everything like that. But everything that nails it down to particular meetings at particular times, and we're working to this and we've got this forward plan, I just think takes it away. And history has shown that we keep missing deadlines. We keep getting these reports at the last minute. We keep getting reports missed. It's been particularly a problem on, you know, Economy and Place Committee. And if we didn't have such a required level of formality, which we keep, you know, missing, then I think we could potentially improve the decision making. That's the crazy idea, just to ponder, just to, you know,
okay,
think about it for 30 seconds as we go to bed tonight, everybody. You know, could it be improved?
It's not either or. And as we put together the new arrangements, you know, because this is all the points you've made were recognised in the CFGS report. The whole point of putting in the arrangements that we all voted for at full council is to try and address some of those issues by having the opportunity for more informal engagement outside of the formal public meeting. So I don't disagree with that, and, you know, it would be up to us to make it work. Any final comments? But and keep it subject to review. You know, I'm sure some things will not work out as we intended, and we say, well, that hasn't worked. What do we need to do better or differently? But, you know, it'll stand or fall on whether we make it work. And I'm sure we will. Okay, agenda item 10, urgent business. Not been notified of any. Finished before 8 o'clock. Not bad going. Thank you very much for your attendance and contribution, and good night.